Chapter 2. Talking about you. If you compare any two products or businesses, I can guarantee that the one described better is the one that sells better. Questions in the first domain that I want to teach you are questions about yourself. When a company is considering hiring you, it's natural for them to inquire about you and your background. Mastering the ability to describe yourself elegantly as a project management professional is a matter of life and death. You will most likely encounter at least one question related to this topic during almost every job interview you go through. Therefore, there's no justification for not being well prepared and giving an excellent response every time. This question category is also very strategic as it gives you the power to solidify your first impression and establish control early on in the interaction with your recruiters. Remember, the recruiters have noticed your CV and decided to invite you for an interview, which means they already like you. Delivering powerful answers at the beginning of the discussion will amplify the initial attraction. Please, make a mental note that questions within this domain are usually one of the first ones due to their innate introductory nature. Let's consider a hypothetical scenario. Imagine asking a girl out for a coffee. A man would never ask a girl out if he doesn't think she is attractive somehow, right? But we also know that drinking a cup of coffee is not the end goal. It is just a step forward in the interaction. There is an apparent sequence in the process. It starts with initial attraction. An employer liked your CV, followed by an invitation for an interview round, the equivalent of a coffee date, an invitation for a second round, the equivalent of a second date, and so on. You are responsible for managing, amplifying, and building upon the initial attraction. If you make a mistake with this question type early in the interview, you will go down the slippery slope with very slim chances of return. I have often failed in this domain, making rookie mistakes, and I want to teach you how to avoid these. Tell me about yourself sounds like an innocent and easy question from afar, but you should not underestimate it. Let's take a moment and look from a different perspective. Imagine that you are the hiring manager. Your company is looking to hire a project manager for a specific business need. Most likely, there is an expected increase in the project workload. New projects are coming up, and they needed somebody literary yesterday. Hiring the wrong person is costly. Any delay in the recruitment process will cause an overload of the existing project managers, and they may burn out and leave. In a situation like this one, you have to shoot sharp. It has to be one bullet, one kill. There is no room for mistakes. The problem is so painful that the companies are willing to spend in the range of $100,000 annually to resolve it. Let's pause for a moment. Take note of two things at this stage. 1. The company has a problem that hurts too. They saw something in your CV that triggered them to invite you for a conversation. The reason why the employer invited you to an interview is because they saw something in your CV. I want you to discover what triggered their interest. A company will never invest precious time and resources to talk with you if they are not interested. At some stage, you must have looked like a solution to their problem. Your main focus should be to amplify this initial attraction when you meet with them for an interview. The key to success in the first stage was your CV. Once you spark that initial attraction, it is your interview skills and performance that will propel you forward. As soon as you are invited for an interview, the game starts. It's like a sales process where you must position and sell yourself as part of the solution instead of the problem. Let's take, for example, one of the most frequently asked questions in this domain. Imagine you show up for an interview. The first thing you get is this. Why don't you go ahead and perhaps tell me a little bit about yourself? Why do recruiters ask this? It is not even a question. Remember, the purpose is to understand what type of project manager you are and evaluate your fit with the problem they are trying to resolve. Typical questions. You can get this in many flavors, but at its core, the essence is the same. Tell me about yourself. What type of project manager are you? Can you walk me through your career trajectory and highlight your most significant achievements? What unique qualifications do you bring to this position? Please give me a brief overview of your background and experience. What type of projects have you done? What are some of the major milestones in your career that have led you to this point? What would your boss or peers say about you? The critical skill here is to develop the ability to detect a tell me about yourself type of question. Sometimes it will be obvious, but sometimes it will be trickier. Once you get a question during an interview, try to mentally replace it with, "Tell me about yourself," and see if there is a significant change in the meaning. If not, you know you are dealing with this category of questions. I call it the You category or Domain 1, a domain of questions where the answers involve information about you. After identifying the category, in this case, the You domain, you should utilize my system, the answer strategies, frameworks, and other elements to create a compelling and dynamic response. More details regarding these techniques will be provided shortly. Answer strategy. Let's pause for a moment and look at the bigger picture. I want you to reflect on the true purpose of this particular question category. What is the real underlying question that you need to address here? Here is my answer strategy. A. Tell me about yourself as a project manager briefly. This creates the main structure of the interview, aka the next 50 minutes, and B. Briefly list all your contextual selling points. Focus on their benefits rather than your features as a project manager. Interviewers usually are not explicit and may leave out those two extra clarifications, as a project manager, and briefly from the actual question, but you must always keep them in mind. You should always stick to professional topics and be concise when answering this question type. The interviewer does not want to know about your personal life, favorite sport, music, or star sign. He simply does not care, and even if he did, discussing personal stuff under such severe time pressure is a cruel waste of time. Remember, you have only 50 minutes, which brings me to the second point. Be brief. Never talk in stretches longer than 5 to 6 minutes at one go. You have to allow the interviewer to ask clarifying questions and create the illusion that he controls the conversation. Even though this is an interview, it should not be a monologue, but rather a discussion. Develop the ability to pause naturally. Do not talk all the time. Incorporating moments of silence can significantly enhance the overall experience and give the impression of structure and rhythm. Okay, but how do you talk about yourself as a project manager briefly? Picture yourself as a collection of colorful and intricately fitting Lego pieces. I realize this is an oversimplification, but bear with me. It will become clearer shortly. If I were to ask you to describe yourself, one straightforward approach would be to describe each of the Lego parts that make up who you are. If you could provide a nice, simple explanation of each piece, that would be practically a description of yourself, right? In figurative terms, you need to be very comfortable discussing the important and relevant components that make you up as a project manager. But you are a complex human being. You have 15 years of experience, and there are so many things to talk about. Where do you start? How do you cover that in 5 to 6 minutes? Remember, you have to be brief. You do not have time for a complete and detailed description, so instead, you highlight only your best and most relevant building blocks. You have to be very selective. How do you know which elements are the best? How do you determine what is relevant and what is not? How do you select which Lego blocks to talk about? Well, this depends on the context of the opportunity at hand. For example, if you are applying for a finance project manager, you will mention that you have done projects in a bank, if you have done any, of course. You must selectively compress your story by showcasing your most valuable Lego pieces related to the specific opportunity you are applying for. These are your selling points. Do not focus too much on general selling points, but highlight your unique ones. For example, don't say you have a natural grasp of software applications. Instead, say that you are a Microsoft Project Power user, especially if you find out the company uses this software to manage projects. Doesn't this seem like manipulation? Am I implying that you should be dishonest? No, it is not. And no, I am not advising you to lie. My advice is to be selective. I call this selective disclosure. Look, you have to cover a vast area in minimal time, several minutes per answer. So naturally, you must cut out some facts and highlight others. My question is, would you rather leave out the points that work against you or those that work in your favor? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Note that I am not asking you to modify facts, which is a lie, but simply highlight those facts that move your agenda forward. Imagine you have identified the building blocks that present you in the best possible light. How do you sequence them in your answers? My general rule of thumb here is to provide a high-level answer to a high-level question and vice versa. You need a solid compression structure aligned with the employer's problems and context to give a balanced high-level answer. I cannot emphasize this enough. Solid compression structure is vital here because the question is very general, and you must leave many facts out. What is a compression structure? Think about it as a skeletal support structure of your answer. It enables you to shrink your answer proportionally. Consider the question, "Tell me about yourself," a very general question. Whenever you get such a broad question, you must create your compression structure. You must identify the irrelevant elements and cut them out from the answer. So based on the strategy that I gave you, the first thing you should leave is everything personal. Boom, 50% fewer things to think about. Okay, so personal stuff is out the window. Let's talk about professional experience. Let's say that you worked at a reception desk in a hotel for 5 years during your early 30s. Is that related to project management? Do you need to talk about it during the interview? My advice is not to bring that up proactively if you don't get a specific question about that period of your life. Project managers come in several flavors. What type of project manager are you? Have you worked on internal projects or client-facing projects? Do you use waterfall, agile, or hybrid methodology? Let's assume that you have selected the most relevant elements from your professional experience, and now you need to build your answer. How do you do that? The PEAK framework. PEAK stands for personal, experience, environment, and knowledge. Please note that personal refers to character traits essential in project management, not your favorite rock band or star sign. PEAK is just a mnemonic to help you remember these 4 groups. You have to identify a few relevant examples or simple talking points within each group and cover them briefly. In a real-life situation, I usually sequence these in the following order. Experience. Companies want to resolve a painful problem by hiring you, and they are interested in what you can do professionally, not so much about what you know. Hiring managers look at what you have done in the past and your performance to date, hoping you will repeat these once you join their team. Therefore, you must convey that you have worked on similar projects and performed well through your answers. Therefore, when I get a "tell me about yourself" question, I always start with my professional experience. Knowledge. Even though knowledge is not as vital as experience, you will have to expand in this area once you pass a certain seniority level. Knowledge refers to your technical ability to manage projects. Here you talk about project methodologies, certificates, and tools that you have mastered. You also demonstrate that you speak the correct jargon and use the terms correctly. You have to sound like a project manager. Environment. Your environment determines your options in life. Imagine that you are in a room with one window and one door. You can look through the window and see the view, or you can go out through the door, right? Now imagine that you are in a room with 10 windows and 10 doors. All of a sudden, you are presented with 10 different views and 10 different exit options that generate a total of 100 combinations. The second environment gives you more choices and flexibility. Human beings are the only creatures that can change their environment. For example, a shark is a king in the water but will last several minutes in a desert environment. A lion is a king in the jungle, but pretty helpless in the sea. As a human being, you can select your environment. You can survive in the sea and the desert, but you will naturally tend to perform better in certain environment types. Take advantage of that and learn to be strategic about your environment. Select an optimal environment that gives you the most options in relation to what you want to achieve. How is that relevant to project managers? A project manager may perform excellently in one company, but may be a low performer in another. It is your responsibility to choose your employer. This is also one of the reasons you should never talk negatively about your current or previous employer. After all, you decided to work for them, and if it was so bad, you could have changed them. If you haven't changed them, it means it was not so bad, or you didn't have many options. Nobody wants to associate with people who have no options. Take my advice, never talk negatively about an employer, especially during a job interview. It is so sad that most people are blind to their environment and unaware that they can be selective and non-exclusive about it. Let that sink for a moment. You can be selective and non-exclusive about your environment. Consider these types of environment for a moment. Your romantic relationship, your flat or house, your neighborhood, your friends, your job title, your employer, the city you live in, the country you live in, the continent. At the pace Elon Musk is moving, we may soon have the ability to even change the planet. Your immediate professional environment is your department or function. For example, you are part of the project management office in finance. If you zoom out a bit more, you can talk about your company and industry. Your initial steps are to become aware of these environmental layers and consider whether they enhance or hinder your performance. Do they support your career trajectory? Are you a lion in the desert or a lion in the sea? Become comfortable talking about your environmental choices and any adjustments you envision making. You can change many of those within a couple of months. Personal. The word personal here has to do with who you are as a human being in the context of project management. Even though the title is personal, you should talk only about character traits relevant to project management. Good topics to talk about here are essential character traits like client-facing capability, stakeholder management, empathy, ambiguity tolerance, conflict resolution, leadership, etc. Spend approximately 1 minute talking about each of those 4 areas: experience, knowledge, environment, personal, which will serve as an excellent foundational answer structure. Remember, never tell the interviewer that you are using an answer framework or mention any category titles. Just make sure that you say something about each of them, give some real examples from each category, and then shut up. Remember the peak mnemonic and the suggested sequence. The interviewer will feel the structure and completeness of your answer subconsciously. Conveying a balanced profile. The peak framework works even more powerfully if you balance its 4 dimensions. Failing to do so will make you look odd. Consider these imbalances top-heavy on experience. I call this the nerd. You have 20 project management certifications and 2 years of practical experience. You have read the books and passed the exams, but you have not practiced your craft sufficiently. You live in a theoretical fantasy world. Typically, recently graduated ambitious students come across this way. Some academic profiles also fall into this type. For example, a professor in project management, or a project management trainer who has devoted his entire life to teaching, but not doing what he teaches. They know the terminology and concepts and sound like a real project manager, but behind the shiny facade, they are vulnerable to practical questions. They will frequently pass the first HR interview round as they will fool the recruiter, but they will have a hard time fooling the hiring manager if he is a practitioner. Remember, to know and not to do is not to know. If you have no frame of reference for what it is to do this job practically, you cannot pass an actual interview. Most books and courses do not go to that level of day-to-day detail. Top-heavy on environment. I call this the industry guy. This imbalance is a relatively rare case. You know a lot about the company or industry you operate within, but you are light on practical, hands-on project experience and knowledge. This type of industry awareness is an excellent additional thing to have, but on its own, it is weak. Avoid this imbalance by accumulating practical experience and relevant knowledge. For example, professionals from a startup environment who are naturally organized and quick learners may have worked accidentally on projects, but this does not make them good corporate project managers. Top-heavy on personal. I call this the good guy. Being a nice person to talk to is an excellent quality, but if this is the only thing you bring to the table, you will look like a pleaser. You work to deliver results, not so much to make friends. You do not have formal line-level authority over your project team, and a solid set of soft skills is a great asset. You have to convey that you can hold your ground and have difficult conversations when the situation calls for it. Map yourself against these 4 categories and inspect for potential irregularities. If you spot an imbalance, consider actions to close it and include them in your professional development plan. The goal is to expand as much as possible in a balanced manner. Remember, balance is the key word here. A more modest but balanced profile is more attractive than a profile skewed heavily towards a single dimension. Have you ever met a person you cannot get over? Why do we forget some people and cannot get over others? What would be the benefit if the hiring manager could not get you out of his mind? Essentially, it boils down to this. How do you come across as irreplaceable? The secret lies in conveying multiple dimensions in balance. Allow me to elaborate. Imagine you meet a man who is attractive, but that's the only noteworthy thing about him. Chances are, you'll forget about him quickly, as looks alone aren't enough to make a lasting impression. However, let's say he's not only good-looking but also has an exciting hobby, like being a military test pilot for NASA. This adds a second dimension to his personality and makes him more unique. It's the combination of his attractiveness and fascinating hobby that creates a certain allure. Suddenly, this stack transforms him from a cute guy to the cute, funny NASA test pilot. As a project manager, you must create as many dimensions as possible. Then you have to communicate them authentically to the interviewer, while being careful to strike a balance among them. To continue my exaggerated example, mention that you are a military test pilot. Throw a joke about NASA and be nice. Do not talk about being a pilot for 20 minutes straight. This will create an imbalance and skew the discussion. It may be perceived as bragging. Subconsciously, imbalances are not perceived positively, and they can cause you to lose valuable points. Remember, multiple dimensions and balance. Okay, all this sounds nice, but how do we build the actual answer? All perfect answers are contextual. I cannot provide you with the exact responses to use, since I am not familiar with your background or the specific job you're applying for. However, what I can offer are principles for success and failure. To increase your chances of success, it's crucial to incorporate as many success principles as possible while avoiding failure principles when constructing your answers. Let's look at some of my favorite success principles. Over time, you will naturally discover your own principles and incorporate them into your answers. A slightly imperfect fit. At first glance, the idea of a slightly imperfect fit may seem counterintuitive. After all, recruiters typically search for the ideal candidate who perfectly matches the job requirements. However, in reality, overly qualified or perfectly qualified candidates often aren't the best fit for the role. This is because the employer wants a project manager who can grow into the position and remain with the company for at least 2 years. If the candidate is already a perfect fit, there is little room for growth and development within the role. Therefore, the employer may actually prefer a candidate who is a slightly imperfect fit, but has the potential to grow and develop within the position over time. Therefore, it is an excellent idea to proactively engineer minor and non-critical flaws or gaps in your profile to create the impression of a slightly imperfect fit and position them strategically in your answers. Nobody likes perfection. People are naturally attracted to flaws. Remember, these can change from one job opportunity to another. The specific set of job requirements should determine the imperfect elements. Do not make them too big or significant. Just convey the impression that the role is a bit of a stretch for you and will keep you motivated over the next couple of years. You do not have to say that verbally. You can simply convey it through your answers. For example, early in my career, I applied for a project management opportunity where having a PMP certificate was a must. At the time, I was still not certified but was studying intensively. The interview went very well. The hiring manager was wrapping up, and he suddenly said, "By the way, you are PMP certified, right?" "No, I am still not." He typed something in his laptop and said, "I am afraid a PMP certificate is a hard requirement for this position. I am in the process of preparing for the exam. I have been studying for the past 4 months, and I will certify within the next 2 months. I have all the knowledge right now since I am in exam delivery mode. Feel free to ask me some questions from the PMBOK guide." The hiring manager smiled and asked, "If I extend an offer to you, will you promise to certify in the first 6 months on the job?" "Yes, this is what I am planning to do anyway." I received and accepted an offer from this company, technically breaking a hard requirement. Of course, I passed the exam in the first 6 months, as agreed during the interview. Another example from my personal experience is when I applied for a client-facing project management role without a single day of the client-facing experience. My pitch was something along the following lines: I would like to develop client-facing project management skills that I currently lack. I am an excellent internal project manager, and here are the skills that I believe will help me be successful in the role you are looking to fill. I want to expand in this area, and I am completely transparent with you up front. This is why I am looking to switch jobs. Otherwise, I am very successful in my current internal role. I ended up receiving an offer and accepting again, technically speaking, being an imperfect fit. Both times I received significant salary increases and seniority boosts. When used correctly, this is a powerful concept that generates a lot of trust. Apply it with caution because it can backfire if you overdo it and make you come across as underqualified. Failure principles. By now you have learned that you should highlight only relevant peak examples. The key is to paint a balanced profile and pick specific and contextual talking points. If you are applying for a job within the finance industry, highlight your work as a project manager in a bank, and those elements automatically become your selling points. Every interview is unique, and you will probably use a slightly different set of talking points to reveal various aspects of your profile. Note that you can also use the peak model more strategically as a development tool. Suppose you map yourself against that model and establish that you do not have sufficiently developed leadership skills or examples to illustrate specific answer elements. In that case, you can discuss those with your line manager during your professional development conversation and identify actions to start bridging the gaps. Alternatively, simply research the topic on your own or hire a coach. Your availability to start. It takes about 90 days to hire a project manager in most parts of the world, assuming 30 days for search and selection and 2 months for the notice period, the USA being an exception. Most employers need project managers immediately. If you are unemployed or have 1 month of notice, make sure to flag your ability to step into the role quicker than the competition. Highlighting this fact alone can get you an offer in some urgent situations. Let's look at some failure principles. Building your answers around those principles makes you more likely to fail. I am teaching you these to create awareness about them to eliminate them from your answers. Learn to recognize those and sanitize your talk track from them. They destroy value. Attachment. Communicating over attachment is detrimental to your success. Nothing screams low value louder than a needy person. I know you need this job, but being desperate will not help you get it. Whenever I sense an over-attachment in one of my students, I stop that immediately by using a simple trick. I ask the person to imagine that interview was yesterday, and he failed miserably. It was a terrible experience, and he could not answer a single question. Now, he will meet the interviewer simply to have a coffee and discuss lessons learned. This simple mental trick removes the pressure and the anxiety buildup. Most of my students expect to pump them up. Instead, I ask them to accept the worst possible outcome and calm down. As a result, they enter the interview calmly, and nothing can scare them anymore because mentally, they have gone through the worst possible rejection. The more excited you enter the room, the more attached you come across. If you telegraph too much interest, interviewers will think that you are desperate and that this job is your only option. Valuable project managers are not worried during an interview because they are in demand and have options. Never talk about how much you want this particular job. Don't be arrogant either. You must convey interest, but not attachment. The tricky thing here is to find a balance. Negative talk track. Never, under any circumstances, talk negatively about your current situation or employer. Negativity destroys your value, and it says that you are desperate. Are you applying with the company simply to run away from your current employer? Is this your only motivation? You will never come across a king who complains about the law in his kingdom because it is the king who makes the law. You have to own your circumstances. One of the reasons kings and queens are so attractive is because they never complain. As a general rule of thumb, never say self-deprecating stuff and make the interviewer feel sorry for you. You should leave the people you meet in a better emotional state than you found them. Unless explicitly asked, avoid talking about challenging periods, bad bosses, toxic colleagues, etc. The general feel of the talk track should be something along the lines: I am okay where I am now. It is just that this is a great opportunity, and I would like to explore it. Lack of structure. Answers built on solid structure are sexy, especially within this question domain. The main reason is that questions here tend to be pretty high level, so naturally, you will need a solid compression technique. Have you ever seen a stunning-looking girl smiling at you and playing with the tip of her gorgeous long hair? If you are a guy, you have probably wondered how such a small, innocent gesture could have such an impact on you. It is like magic. Let's flip the example. Do you know the male equivalent that triggers the same feeling within a woman? It is when a man displays confidence and makes a decision. It feels like magic to a woman. Do you know what the hiring manager's equivalent is? It is when you inject structure into your answers. It doesn't have to be obvious. Inject it in the background. Human beings are addicted to structure. They can detect tiny amounts of it, and it attracts them like a magnet. Most people would never notice what draws them to you, while subconsciously, they will detect the underlying structure. The topic of structure is a horizontal theme in this program. It creates a solid foundation to showcase and build upon your value. There are many ways to implement structure in an answer. You can create a chronological order or MICE type of structure. MICE is a McKinsey & Company term and stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Feel free to research it if you are not familiar with the concept. For example, when you talk about professional experience, you can start with your current job and go back, or start with your master's degree and move forward through the years. There is no right and wrong way, as long you have a logical sequence. What structure you choose is determined by the situation at hand. Many people feel the urge to break the silence, especially when under stress. The job interview is a stressful experience because the interviewer is assessing you. Sometimes you will get tough questions, and not knowing what to say, you will feel the irresistible urge to open your mouth and start talking intuitively, spitting out random facts just to release the pressure. This behavior, in turn, will confuse the interviewer. Do not do this. Human beings appreciate the structure, and if you give them a solid frame, they will follow it. But there is another extremely important aspect here. Creating the structure of a "tell me about yourself" question that is asked early during the interview determines the master structure of the entire interview and impacts the remaining questions. You are defining the boundaries of the battlefield with this answer. The interviewer will likely ask follow-up questions based on that initial high-level answer. It is your opportunity to manipulate the discussion. Non-calibrated granularity level. When you get a high-level question, you have to give a high-level answer. Deliver the response with a crisp structure and shut up. The interviewer will ask clarifying questions based on what you have said. Never be the person who talks about an irrelevant detail for 20 minutes. Always think if a question is a high or low-level one. Do you need to provide an example, or can you get away with an opinion? You have to develop the ability to zoom in and out seamlessly on parts of your professional profile without getting a headache. Lengthy monologues. Never talk for more than 5 to 6 minutes at a time. The interview is supposed to be a dialogue. You will indeed do most of the talking, but the interviewer should feel in control. The perfect flow is that the interviewer will ask a question, then you will talk for 5 to 6 minutes, and then they will ask a follow-up question that zooms in on a specific aspect of what you just said. Case studies. Case study 1. Interviewer: thank you for being on time for our interview. Let's start. Why don't you go ahead and tell me about yourself? Project manager: sure. Could you be more specific? Interviewer: awkward silence. Well, for sure. I don't want to know anything about your personal life. Do you need more guidance? Project manager: my name is John. I have a chemistry background and hold a master's degree in science, but I never worked as a scientist. My hobby is repairing old cars and listening to music. Analysis of the case. This answer is pretty poor, and unfortunately, I have done something similar in real life early in my career, which resulted in painful rejection. Notice that the interviewer asked a high-level question that requires a high-level answer. Instead, the project manager asks for clarification, trying to narrow down the scope of the question. This situation is embarrassing. If I ask you to tell me something about yourself and you do not have the answer ready, there must be something very wrong with you. Who is the ultimate authority on the topic of you? Of course, it is not so easy. If I knew what I know now, I would have paraphrased the question mentally to, tell me about you as a project manager briefly. Remember, the interviewer is looking to close a project management role, and he wants to know more about the candidate's ability to solve a project management problem. Talking about your hobbies is a waste of time. Furthermore, unless required for the job, the chemical industry point seems irrelevant, unless required in the job description. The only good thing about this answer is that it is short, which means not too much time was wasted, but you will lose quite a few value points if you answer like that. Case study 2. Interviewer: thank you for being on time for our interview. Let's start. Why don't you go ahead and tell me about yourself? Project manager. Sure, I am John, a PMP certified project manager with 7 years of experience, mainly in the banking sector. I have strong client-facing experience, which I gained in a predominantly virtual environment. Analysis of the case. Do you see how this is a much better answer? The project manager has 7 years of experience. This defines the battlefield and sets the context. From now on, he focuses the discussion on what happened within those 7 years. Most of them are in the banking sector, environment element. Imagine that the candidate is interviewing with a bank. This delivers instant value. He is a client-facing type of project manager. This skill would be an additional value point if required in the job description. The applicant is used to remote work, which is another value point if this is the predominant way of working for the employer, even though in the post-COVID-19 era, this will be the new normal. Remember, all value points are contextual. What represents value in one situation may not add value in a different one. You need to read the job description very carefully and craft your answer based on the unique opportunity you are applying for. You have to match facts from your professional profile to the requirements in the job descriptions and amplify them with relevant examples. The fact that the project manager has worked in a bank could be a value point if he is applying with another bank, but may be irrelevant if he is applying for a software development startup. In this case, a more valuable point would be highlighting specific software development projects that he led in the bank. Congratulations, you made it through the first question domain. Let's recap. You are guaranteed to get a "tell me about yourself" question early in the interview. The essence of these types of questions is, tell me about yourself as a project manager briefly. The structure of your answer will determine the master structure of the entire interview. High-level questions require high-level answers, and you will have to compress your answer using a specific structure. We covered a lot of important material in this chapter. The information in this chapter alone can get you to pass some job interviews, but we have a lot more to go through. In the next chapter, I will teach you how to answer questions related to your motivation. Buckle up. It is about to get even more intense.